Hello, Ways and Means. Happy Tuesday. Good afternoon. It is February 4th. Happy February. We have our first vote scheduled for this afternoon on H-141, an act relating to fiscal year 2025 budget adjustments. Emily Byrne is joining us to talk us through the final work that the Appropriations Committee did. As will be our way for many, many, many bills this session. We are not going to be able to get our heads around the entirety of every piece of nuance in this bill. We are going to do our very best to stay in our lane. And fortunately for this bill, we already have a memo about our lane that we've looked at. So Emily's going to talk to us through how that all worked out.
Great. So for the record, Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. What I've done is I took that memo that you sent to House Appropriations Committee, and then I just sort of annotated it with like, this is the section in the bill where it shows up. And I will just walk through the memo and point to the sections of the bill. It's Act H-141. It's on the website if you want to pull it up and follow along.
Can you share your screen so we can follow along?
Yes,
Thank you much, sir.
Perfect. All right. So I put just, in green in the little red box is where the sort of annotations are. So started the first one was related to CCFAP, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. There were some changes made in the appropriations related to the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, and this committee recommended changing the appropriations as put forward, but putting a reserve in place. So what has been done in the Budget Adjustment Act is in Section 79, there is language that expands the use of the Human Services Caseload Reserve, which exists in the general fund currently. It has over $90 million in it, and says to the Commissioner of Finance and Management, in the event you need to sort of shore up the child care contribution special fund because the revenues don't perform or the expenses are higher than anticipated, you can utilize the Human Services Caseload Reserve and make transfers to make that fund whole in the event that there is that it's not in balance at the end of the fiscal year. The sort of thinking behind that is that as you recall, the Treasurer's report, I think it was last week, they were in here speaking about the report on reserves. That report says, hold money that's in that fund for now and make a decision about a reserve in the future. And I think that sort of in the future place is further in the future because we've really only had 4 months of experience with the further expanded program and with the payroll taxes only around since July. So there's no formal reserve yet, sort of waiting for more information on that. So then in Section 80, there is language that says, there's intent it's the General Assembly's intent to establish a reserve in the future once there's sort of more information about what's appropriate given the behavior in the fund with revenue and expenses. So that's how that is dealt with.
Thank you so much for this. Is there any way to reconcile this against the pre-kindergarten expenditures? Because these funds both hit the same age kids in the same setting at the same time of day.
Yes, we got your question got forwarded to me and we're looking into that.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question now.
And we're going to need the Human Services Committee is going to take significant testimony this session on the pre-K report of I don't know if it's task force or a working group or whatever it was, and offer us recommendations and the Education Committee recommendations, because even just how we're counting those. So all of those things all need to be reconciled for whatever education transformation we need to do as well.
Emily, two questions. One is, so I didn't fully understand when you had previous conversations about the Child Care Financial Assistance Fund. That $8 million was allocated from last year's appropriations to kind of seed the fund. And that the recommendation was to keep those funds in there. But then the reserve, in the meantime, the recommendation here is to go into the human resources reserve fund, right?
Yeah, and that would only occur if, so right there, so there's $8 million that was put in that fund, right? To sort of hedge unknowns related to revenue and expenditures in the next fiscal year. If we get into a situation where revenues don't perform and expenditures overperform, and the fund, and the program needs to utilize that money that was put into that fund last year, this is sort of like an additional backstop to say, like, if you get to zero or negative, right, pull that money in. But that 8 million, that 8 million still stays there, and doesn't go anywhere unless we get into a programmatic situation where revenues and expenses
Yeah.
perform in such a way that requires the department to draw on those funds.
There's no specific encumbrance of a dollar amount on the human services caseload reserve. Okay, so it's just in case you need it, here's a door you can go to and access these funds.
Yep.
Okay, there was one other question, but I totally forgot it. Thank you.
One way I'm thinking about it, which is more rigid than how money is much more fungible than this mental construct I've created to make this make sense to me. So like lots of grains of salt is that the human services caseload reserve is if the caseloads get much higher than are expected. So if there's more sort of draws on the system than expected, because that is a number that we're not entirely clear on right now. And the promise of the reserve in the child care special fund is about, we are not entirely sure about the revenue going into that fund. And so it's to stabilize that, which is, again, like money is much more fungible than that.
Right, ultimately, end of the day.
And we're in fairly unstable times. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all the money can be moved around, but that's sort of how that is a dichotomy that I've created in my mind to provide comfort in these times.
I got it. And the wording is still on the bill to say, let's also look at a child care special fund, reserve fund, down the road. It said any remaining balance will be kept in it.
Yeah.
Doesn't especially establish it. Do we need any kind of construct to establish it?
I think at this point, I think the appropriations committee thought, given how new everything is, it was a little premature to officially establish something.
Future establishment, so it says. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So the next section, these are the changes to the adult ed and literacy and flexible pathways related to the increased demand for the adult diploma program that was sort of reconstituted differently during the last biennium. I will point out, so that those two sections bumped to section 41 and 42, and the reason that they did that was because in section 40, there is an additional reduction to the state-placed students appropriation by $1 million. And I should flag, so when the budget comes through, right, so we get the Budget Adjustment Act, has a bunch of changes in it. And then when we get the FY26 budget, often what happens is there will be proposed changes to FY25 in the FY26 budget. So there was a bunch of things that came through when the governor presented the budget last week to the General Assembly. The House Appropriations Committee went through those changes and sort of had a like, how many of these things can we pull into the Budget Adjustment Act? You know, they just have more information or more detail. What can they pull into the Budget Adjustment Act to kind of accelerate getting moved through?
And so this is just an updated number when we had more recent data since it left our committee.
Exactly, yeah. I took testimony from the Agency of Education in terms of what this change is, and it's going from $20 million for state-placed students to $19 million based on what they think the projected spending is going to be. By putting it in the budget adjustment, it sort of like settles it out and makes it easier to have the 26 conversation around the education fund.
Thank you.
So that's that one. The no change for the what is now in section 43, the changes to the education payment based on the budgets that came in after the legislature adjourned. And the double count of the English language learners grant. The reduction in the appropriation for universal school meals based on anticipated expenditures didn't change. That's now in section 44. The property transfer tax recommendations that this committee made to align the allocations to what was passed in Act 113 was adopted by the committee and is in sections 51 and 61. The next section, section 50, what was 51 of the governor's recommend, which is now section 52, which adjusts the transfers to and from the general fund and other funds. There were no changes to any of these numbers, so it's the same as what was recommended by the committee related to all these changes, some increases and some decreases. And that goes all the way through to this DFR line, the reduction in air transport. In section 53 is where there is a giant list of reversions. About $7 million came from the tax department. The recommendation was to make those reversions. And that happened in the Budget Adjustment Act. Similarly, all the education fund reversions were accepted by the House Appropriations Committee and are in H-141. Oh, yeah, this one. I should know what this one is. So section 54 is the recommendation that any money that is sort of collected and on the bottom line at the end of FY 2025 will be brought forward and utilized in the FY 2026 budget. That number, because there was a new revenue forecast since the governor adopted the budget, and the changes that are in the budget adjustment is about $133 million anticipated to go from 25 to 26. The telephone tax, pushing that out 1 year, as recommended by the committee, is in H-141. The technical amendments related to the payment to Canaan and the Northeast Kingdom Choice districts are as recommended. Same with the repeal of the Workforce Education and Training Fund, the Tobacco Trust Fund technical edits, and the repeal of the Traumatic Brain Injury Fund. And this final one, the recommendation to include the marriage license fee, is in section 85 of H-41.
Removal of the sunset.
The removal of the sunset, yes, is in the bill. So I think that is all of it.
Any other questions for Emily? Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us here in Ways and Means.
Happy. And hopefully I get to come back someday.
I think you're coming back tomorrow, actually.
Oh, I'm coming back tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow.
Twice in 1 week is quite unusual.
Yeah.
Anyone want to discuss anything before we have a motion?
I just want to ask, we've already voted on our changes, right? This is the whole.
Just clarification as to what we're actually gonna be voting, the overall bill.
We are voting to move the whole bill out. Historically, people have navigated that in different ways for themselves, and even the same person might navigate that in different ways throughout the course of a year. It's one of the weird things about being on a money committee. And so some people say like, this is okay with regards to the revenues of the state, and I feel uncomfortable with the policy, but since it's okay with the revenues of the state, I'll vote yes. Sometimes people say, the opposite of that. I don't know. But it's up to each individual member to figure that out for themselves.
Thank you.
I would love a motion. Thanks so much.
We got affirmatively what we just ran through.
Can you try again with H-141?
H-141.
Thank you. Representative Maslin moves that
I'll second it.
we vote affirmatively on H-141, and Representative Holcomb seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, if the clerk could please call the roll.
Certainly will. Representative Brannigan, obviously not here. I will call, I guess I call myself first because I just go through alphabetical order. I will vote yes.
So if you could say your name and then say yes.
Representative Burkhart, yay. Representative Feltus. No. Representative Higley.
No.
Representative Holcomb.
Yes.
Representative Kimball.
Yes.
Representative Madland.
Yep.
Representative Odie.
Yes.
Representative Wazazak.
Yes.
Representative Canfield.
No,
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
So then I just say the motion passes 7 to 3 with 1 abstention.
Thank you, everyone. I am gonna report this one. And we are going to recess while we walk to the pavilion for our next piece of testimony in the Senate Finance.